So this is certainly the most interesting game we'll be seeing in today's episode. Certainly starts out with an unusual and almost startling beginning. The sound of a police siren getting louder and louder. Then the title appears. Don't know if there's ever been an NES intro quite like this one. Now this game was only released in Japan, but there was an unofficial English translation, so we'll actually be taking a look at that so we can understand what's going on in this game. The name of this game is Portopia Renzoku Satsujin Jiken, but in English we call it the Portopia Serial Murder Case. And if this game certainly doesn't look like anything else that's been released on the Famicom so far, that's because it really is the first adventure game released for the Famicom. This genre would become quite popular in Japan. As far as I know, this is almost certainly the first Japanese adventure game, or at least the first popular Japanese adventure game. Its influence in Japan is, quite enormous. The adventure game has been around since the earliest days of computer gaming. It was actually a pretty popular genre in the early to mid-80s in the United States. But in Japan it really took a life of its own, mostly thanks to this game. Later we'll see a lot of games that pretty much copy this directly, and later different genres would sort of branch off, like the visual novel and the various Japanese porno games that still exist to this day. So this game virtually single-handedly created a new genre in Japan. How you actually play this game is you use your D-pad to navigate around the menu. The little square with the graphic is what you're looking at this moment. You can use a magnifying glass to get a closer look at things. You'll often find hidden objects. Of course, this is necessary to actually really get through the game. You can look for clues, pick up clues, find out information about various suspects and other people involved, ask people questions, go to the police headquarters, call in suspects and question them. If you perform the right actions, eventually people will usually give you some more information. For example, you actually have to hit this guy with a little hammer in order to get him to confess. Turns out he's not the murderer, he's just a drug dealer. There are numerous red herrings that pop up throughout this game. And of course, there's also an interesting sense of humor that appears throughout this game. For example, if you hit Yasu in the head with a hammer, he'll make funny little comments. Let's talk a little bit about the history of this game. It was originally released for Japanese NEC computers back in 1983. The game was originally designed by Chunsoft, who, as you might recall from earlier, consists of Yuji Horii, but also Koichi Nakamura. Previously, Chunsoft had released Door, which was by Enix. This is also by Enix. It's the second Enix game for the Famicom. The original computer version actually had you using the keyboard to type in commands. Obviously, for the Famicom port, this wasn't possible, so they used the arrow and button control scheme. This became quite popular, and later Japanese adventure games would all use this. Even nowadays, adventure games and porno games for the Japanese computers have you use the arrows to scroll around rather than actually typing in commands. This Famicom version would prove quite popular, apparently selling around 700,000 copies in Japan, so it was a pretty substantial hit. Chunsoft's next game after this would be Dragon Quest, which would be an even huger hit. Reportedly, while in the United States, Horii played the early US RPG Wizardry, which contains a lot of first-person scrolling around mazes. This inspired him to put a maze in this game. It's actually later on in the game. We'll see a little bit of it later. This is actually the part of the game where most players find it pretty frustrating because you sort of have to find your way through a first-person maze with no map. Now, of course, if you actually go ahead and play this game in the English translation, you'll probably want to take notes. There's actually quite a few things to remember. The game is sort of a puzzle game. You sort of have to logically figure things out. However, one criticism you might have about this game, and about these sorts of games in general, is they don't always involve puzzles so much, but is sort of randomly trying every single option until you find the right one. Some of the things that you have to do in order to progress in this game are, completely rational, but others just seem sort of random, quite frankly. Of course, this criticism can be extended into contemporary Japanese adventure games. They're not so much games as, visual novels in which you have to press just buttons to sort of get to the next line of text. I won't show you the ending of this game. There is a unexpected plot twist at the end, of course. Don't want to spoil it for anyone who actually might play the game. But overall, this game is actually pretty satisfying, and I would definitely recommend it. Certainly, it's the most historically important game we're looking at this episode, and while it's maybe not quite the same level as Mario Brothers, this was a game that had a huge influence in Japan. And we're going to see a lot of detective adventure games for the Famicom. Unfortunately, most of them have not been translated into English like this one has.